Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you live around the world. Well, I've been fiddling away, thinking about and adjusting my hub design, the contender, as it were, and I've got to say, maybe it has edged ahead. Now, in the screen there, on the screen there, you can actually see where these three struts have the much preferred for the high strength connector, where these three don't have it. The thinking here is that for the majority of the hub locations, I can get away without having to use this particular component. But where the demand is higher, or considered higher in my opinion, we can use that in conjunction with the end plates that are screwed fixed to the end of the struts. I have researched a little bit further for the particular Spax screw that I'd been talking about in one of the videos, and it's not actually a screw, it's a threaded rod, but one where it's got the head on the end of it, which is a bit of a shame. A pity we couldn't have a threaded rod as in a machine thread on part of it. Anyway, they actually use it in heavy construction for tendons, and that's what I've been saying. They're a tensile rod, and one of the features, it makes comment that it is a suitable replacement for glued in inserts. And I've gone, oh, that's exactly what the Alp bar style of dome has for its connection, where it has a rod that is, I'm going to say, threaded on the outside and inside, inserted into the timbers to a depth of approximately 320 millimeters, and then they can put their bolts into that the internal thread of it, because it's a machine thread, and dependent on their design, of course, the machine screw can go into it and tighten up, whereas a threaded rod only has that, it can only be inserted and threaded in, and the nut pull up against it, the threaded rod from the Spax type screw. In fact, if you just wait there, I will draw into right there. And if we have a look at it, Spax threaded rod, 800 to 3 meters in length. That's amazing. I actually watched a video ages ago, and I've been trying to find it, and but I can't, of the guy actually winding in a 3 meter threaded rod, and it's quite interesting to see, because, you know, like, we think of screws in a totally different context, but as it says here, the ideal alternative to glued in threaded rods. So that's what I was saying. It's a shame that we couldn't use this in some way to fix this. Well, we could, but it would be I like the idea that Alp bar does, where they epoxy in the sleeve so that the machine thread is, so a bolt can be inserted into it, because I was doubling up in my thinking. You really don't want to thread something into the end of a timber, stop, come back a few days or weeks later, and then tweak it up, because you might find that the fibres have gripped the thread, and the potential is there to cause some damage. Just going on prior experience. No, not in this field though. Some of these threads are 16 millimeter in diameter, so yeah, heavy units. But anyway, I was just referring to this because I don't like saying something and then not being able to back it up. But yeah, 3 meters is a big hunk of screw or threaded rod. So just delete that. So the screws used here can be, or the number can be modified. Long screws on the top, intermediate length screws in the middle, and then none down the bottom because they're not required, because we have this threaded rod going through the bottom and the screws would be redundant. A washer can be placed between the end plate. Now I like this idea because you can get different, I'll say you can get different thickness washers and or combination for fine-tuning the length of your strut. Yes, it would be nice to think that we get everything perfect the first time for the measurements, etc. But most of these washers I've seen are between 1 and 2 millimeters. So in a combination, we've got a nice tuning. My voice is a bit croaky. I've been outside doing some sanding and not enough cups of tea. Anyway, so we can now look at a very neat assembly. We could perhaps drill for different positions the screw holes, because as I was mentioning, some may require the screws to be inserted in the bottom, of course, but some won't, because they'd be redundant. The interface plates can be 25 millimeter wide here in this case, which means we can either make strips out of the tube. It's kind of my go-to approach, and or we could grind a flat bar stock with just take the corners off to let them nest in a little bit. As I said in the previous video, having it dead flat across there is probably not the world's worst thing, because it would create quite significant pressure at that point, which is, as I say, not a bad thing. And I don't see the pressure that we'd be exerting being able to deform a 5 or 6 millimeter thick plate. So at the moment I'm just showing it with 5 millimeters thick there, and of course a washer underneath. The bolt goes into said or the plate that's attached to the stud, but the threaded rod can go through everything and tighten up, and hey presto, we've got a oops, I don't know why I did that, but we've got a very neat, elegant hub assembly that is well able, in my initial thinking, to be used in those high demand areas, i.e. the opened front and the leg area of the dome, because there are no other supporting struts to form the triangulation and dissipate the energy. So in other words, it's concentrating the energies on those particular hubs, and therefore this would be not a bad idea. I made the comment that it's scalable. If it was deemed extreme, the pressures that is, or we need to resist the pressures, it doesn't have to be a 12 mil rod. It can be a 16 mil rod and nut. This can be a slightly bigger hole just to accommodate the nut, and I can't believe the size dome I'd require a 16 millimeter threaded rod. But I also made the comment, and engineers get ready with the slapping stick, that 90% of the holding will be achieved through this, i.e. lower threaded rod assembly. That we don't have a threaded rod in these particular struts means that it's the triangulated areas further up the dome. So one look for the hub with the embellishment or the cosmetic is, I'm going to say, a downgrade, but not particularly ugly downgrade. i.e. you've got a blemish in the wood, well, that's a downgrade, but here we've got a hole in the wood with some metal sticking through. It's even thought that we could make the hole that goes through the hub a stopped hole, or the hole doesn't go all the way through, so you only see it on one side. That's possible. I'm not going to lose any sleep over that one at this stage. So, as I said, I have been kind of pleasantly caught unawares, and this comes back to yet another comment I made of what are the benefits of these videos. And I said, sometimes you'll go down a path to explore an idea, to scratch an itch sort of thing, that leads me to this outcome. Totally unexpected. I'm going to say this particular connection combination has taken precedence over the other ones. They're still there in the background should they be needed, but the reason I like this is that the fixings are at 90 degrees to the axis of the longitudinal axis of the tube, i.e. they're square to the mating surfaces. We don't have to come up with anything particularly clever to accommodate for the angle. That means that the screw type fixings that go through the top have been eliminated. Still a viable option, but when we've got this now as a very serious consideration, that particular issue, the angled fixing, the screw, has gone. The tabbed type connector has been removed, meaning that the top surface is unaffected. It's not adulterated in any way, it's just flat. There's very little downside. I can't see much downside to this other than the quantifying aspect of trying to fixing the screws into the end grain. Now, as a parallel to this, screws are being used more and more in the building industry in place of metal brackets. And the metal brackets have been a tried and tested item, but are time consuming, a little bit tricky to get accurate if the installer is what we would call a bit of a bunny, a bit of a novice, or just rough. And the use of screws, because they've been put through their test, have starting to be used more and more and more. They're not a replacement for the nails for the frames, just to say, in this case I'm thinking top plate to stud, but there are different length screws depending upon the situation, where they may go through what I call a wall plate, the top plate, and then into the stud. And that's for earthquake and wind uplift resistance. They're also used for tying down the trusses to the top plates, and in combination with their placement and what have you, as as determined by the particular manufacturer of the screws, and in combination with the engineers, that's all you need for wind uplift. Now, there may be cases for extreme circumstances where the use of cyclone ties, the Simpson strong ties as an example, may be the only option. I'll accept that, but we're looking at these sorts of fixings more and more seriously. And as I said, this one here is about 125 millimeters long. That is the length of screws we're talking about for our top plate fixings. So they became a contender as well as the specs type screw. I'm still going with specs, by the way, because of their performance and their compliance or capability issues. Now I'm just going to, while I'm prattling, bring this in, and this is the sort of thing I'm starting to refer to. And if you were to use these, you've got to differentiate between a full length and a partial length threaded screw. These ones here are the wafer head, or washer head rather, Spax screws, and these are and I can't remember the name of the head, but it's not the head that's holding, it's the thread. These type, and this is something that only came to me, it's logical once you hear it, but these are screws that are designed to pull together two pieces of timber. These screws are designed to hold together two pieces of timber. Now this will hold together, of course, but there is no real thread. All the strength of this screw for holding together is the head, whereas here is the thread in each piece of timber which does all the holding. The head does nothing, literally. In fact, the deck screws that Spax have, there's no holding down whatsoever, and the screw can be quite loose, to the point where they'll actually show you that you can have a gap between the decking board and the joist, and it's the screws that are holding, and they don't therefore back out of the timber as do normal screws, which would be this sort of thing. I know that is an aside, but the point here is you can get full length, I think, yes, you can get full length, full threaded washer head screws, and they would be the ones I'd be considering for use in here, not the countersink head, which you can also get in Spax screws. The reason for that is I don't want to introduce the strain on the head that could wind up snapping the head if it was put into ultimate load or overload in that case, whereas the washer head would do a good job of resisting that. The downside, of course, is the washer head is the size, so there may have to be a compromise, and there may have to be a compromise, and it may turn out that just through practicality's sake we have to use the countersunk heads, or as I said, we could do a counter bore and get the washer head down below the surface so they don't foul washers or the hub itself. So that was a big long-winded explanation of something that's quite simple. Shaking my head at the moment. Simple as in this is such a clean, uncluttered design that I am seriously thinking of now concentrating my drawing efforts with this being the chosen one. As I said in one of the videos, it was a contender. I think this now has superseded the screw and tab type options, and in combination with the lower strut assembly, the lower threaded rod and tube assembly, it means that we can move ahead with we can put this to bed, as it were, and only have to revise or revisit it if something else crops up in our investigations. That's the thinking. I'm giving it a double thumbs up because, if nothing else, it's opened up an avenue that was closed to me just a few short days earlier when I was investigating this method of attaching the hub and struts. The hub and struts. So, well done, Internet, for having the photos available for us to have a look at, and now we can perhaps wind up with a very nice assembly. There's one question though. I'm going to have to ponder this. I think it's okay. Yes, this would scale, because as in the other style of my previous number 1 version or preference, if we were to go deeper, this is still being used and can be used in all the situations, and it doesn't preclude using. As it scales, this system might become a little bit less required. I made the comment that as you get deeper, you could use this type of assembly in the next row up to replace this, so you won't have to have a 10mm plate there. That was why that original approach was so attractive, because it did scale very, very well. But cosmetically, having a 10mm plate on the end of your strut, a little bit overkill as you get bigger, believe it or not. A problem? No, it's definitely not a problem. What about the simplicity of construction? Well, it's certainly simple. And if this were to be, instead of 90mm thick or deep, 180mm deep, or 190 as it would be in our framing sizes, having a 10mm plate on the end really only serves to attach the top ring of would the extra plate size allow just these 2 type of bolts, or 3, to be used? And that's a question. But the bigger the dome, the more this will work in our favour. I'm going to put it to bed for the night. I'm going to make another cup of tea. My voice is a bit croaky. Some people say if I stop talking so much it might help. Anyway, they might be right. With that, I'll say goodbye, and I'll catch you in the next video. Rightio, I'll see you then. Bye now.